Okay. Going. There we go. All right. So today's webinar is going to be the use of wildlife rehabilitation data to identify animal collision hotspots. I'm Jess Roberts. I'm the Director of Habitat Connectivity here at Wild Virginia. I've been here for just about, oh my gosh, 2 years. Just a little bit information if you this is one of your first webinars that you attended and you haven't heard about us before. Wild Virginia is a state-based conservation organization that works on a few key conservation areas. So tonight we're going to be really talking about the Habitat Connectivity Program, which I run, but we have a couple of other programs that our Conservation Director, Dave Sly, runs around water quality, PFAS, pipelines, and he also has a Clean Water Advocates program. And then, of course, we do a bunch of webinars just like this one. So if you are new here, please do check us out, wildvirginia.org, and we'd love for you to become a member. What's really exciting, tonight we have a lot of our partnering organizations here. So I'm going to hand it over to Amanda to introduce herself and to also introduce the Wildlife Center of Virginia, which we're going to be talking about tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me and for doing all this hard work. My name's Amanda. I'm the Senior Vice President at the Wildlife Center of Virginia. We are a teaching and research hospital located in Waynesboro, Virginia, and we admit currently about 4,600 animals a year. Every year we see our caseload climb and climb. We think we might hit 5,000 patients this year. So the need is out there. So the data that's being used here tonight and that Jess has worked so hard with is coming directly from real animals. These are all real cases, each with a real story, and are animals that we treat in our hospital every day. So unfortunately, vehicle collisions are one of the main causes of admission for wildlife at the center. And so we're talking about everything from box turtles, which I think was our top animal hit by vehicles in 2024 alone. Which is unfortunate, near and dear to my heart. But box turtles, owls, hawks, deer, opossums, rabbits, you name it. So we're just really happy to have this data being put to use and happy for the collaboration. And yeah, thanks for having us and for tuning in.
Thank you so much, Amanda. So Amanda will be here towards the end when we have our Q&A section. So if you have any questions related to Wildlife Center Virginia, she will also be here. So again, please do put your questions in that Q&A. Okay. So to start us off, so we, unfortunately, in Virginia, why we are doing this project, I'm going to give you a little bit of the background information on this project. So I apologize if you've seen this information before. This is something we talk a lot about here at Wild Virginia. Virginia is ranked 9th in the nation for wildlife fuel conflict. It is an issue that is getting worse every year, unfortunately. So, and like Amanda said, wildlife vehicle conflict includes animals that are hit our cars, could be any diverse species of wildlife. This could be turtles, it could be bear. So we are 9th in the nation for this issue. Deer crashes, according to our Virginia Transportation Research Council, has done a lot of research on this issue. They estimate that the average deer crash is around $41,000 in state and personal costs, and we have around 60,000 per year. That's pretty wild. Black bear collisions are also on the rise. This is an old estimate. It might actually be higher these days, but they are also quite expensive and becoming more and more prevalent. Elk vehicle collisions are also happening in Virginia. We have a reintroduced elk population in Southwest Virginia, and they are also increasingly being hit by vehicles. And that is pretty much double the cost of a deer vehicle collision, insane personal costs. Something I also like to talk about that a lot of people maybe are not too aware of is how important the Appalachia is, how important Blue Ridge is, how important Piedmont is to wildlife and habitat connectivity in general. So this is current animal movement for looking for resources and mates, but also future animal movement for when we have this changing climate that's happening. So if you look at this lovely image that came out of the Nature Conservancy a couple of years back, this shows the migration and movement routes of birds in blue, mammals in pink, and amphibians in yellow. And as we can see, Appalachia, Blue Ridge, Piedmont is a huge wildlife corridor, not only for Americas in general, but globally, it is one of the largest migration corridors. So one of the large reasons why Virginia sees so much wildlife field conflict, and why it is so important to protect, conserve, and connect. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on legislation on this issue, because that is one of the key components that Wild Virginia does, and that is a part of my work. So some successes we've seen in the past is in 2020, we had a helping hand as well as Wildlife Center Virginia in getting a wildlife corridor action plan legislation passed. So what this did was it requires our state agencies to write a wildlife corridor action plan to really see where the barriers to wildlife movement are, where the hotspots of wildlife vehicle conflict also are, and to connect them, and so we can build mitigation like wildlife crossings and protecting habitat corridors. 2021, we passed another legislation that's basically, we have this wildlife corridor action plan, but we need state agencies to use it in all of their planning, such as their infrastructure planning, especially our Virginia Department of Transportation. The best we could get was that we are having our state agencies consider the results from the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan. So they're not mandated to do it, but they are required to consider it when they're thinking about infrastructure projects in Virginia. And we had the very first Wildlife Corridor Action Plan published in 2023. This is the initial data that came out of the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan, or what we call WCAP. And so just like I said, they identified areas of high biodiversity movement, so current and potential future movement of wildlife. So that's what we're seeing in green. They're called wildlife biodiversity resilience corridors. It's basically where we think animals are moving now and in the future between key ecological cores. So these are high quality habitats. And so that's what we're seeing in green. And we can see it's very much so more aligned with Blue Ridge and more towards Appalachia. And then you can see in purple, we have these areas of high wildlife vehicle conflict. It's pretty much all over the state. Again, we are 9th in the nation for that wildlife vehicle conflict. So this really shows it. However, this data that we're seeing here in purple is just from police report data. So if you get into a crash with a deer and a cop shows up and you make a report, that's where this data is coming from. Our Virginia Transportation Research Council, however, showed that this is massively underreported, sometimes as high as 9 times underreported of what we're actually seeing. Because it only includes large mammal data, so things like deer and bear, it's not counting, for instance, when a good citizen sees a turtle on the road and swerves off the road and gets into an accident, something like that, for instance. So it doesn't include that data, so it's a little bit more biased. So we did get these nexus areas out of this Wildlife Corridor Action Plan where the corridors and the high wildlife field conflict align, so maybe we could put a wildlife crossing. But we need to kind of redo this data to include other sources. We're not really seeing the whole biodiversity implications of wildlife field conflict and the fragmentations of roads in Virginia. So we need to update that somehow. So something that's really exciting, our state agencies did get some federal funding to redo the WCAP and incorporate all different types of data, and they are working on that for the year 2027 when it needs to be published. So that is happening. They are including some data from what's called Virginia's Species of Greatest Conservation Need. So they are incorporating a little bit more of that data to have a more biodiversity aspect to it. But as you'll see in just a second, it's still missing some key data points. So what are we doing? Like I said, We're also including those species of greatest conservation need in the next WCAP, the next Wildlife Corridor Action Plan, to really better identify where species are moving and where they're getting hit by cars. But how can we pull in more data? VDOT is already working on this. One of their solutions is when they go out, when one of VDOT's contractors go out on the road to pick up a carcass. It's kind of morbid, but when they go out and they pick up, let's say, a deer that passed away on the side of a highway, or a bear, or what have you, that contractor has this application that they are tracking exactly where, on which road, where on that road they're picking up, the date, time, etc., what the species is. So we can have a better idea of where animals are getting hit by cars and killed. So this is their this is their pilot program. They have it open in 3 of the 9 VDOT districts of Virginia. So it's still a little bit limited in where they're gathering information, and it's only with their contractors. So it's not with any VDOT staff that goes out and picks up a carcass. They don't need to track the location data as of now. It's just for contractors. Still though, really great data we didn't have before, starts to round out that police report data a little bit more. So this is what the application looks like. You can Google this. It's on our Habitat Connectivity Hub at Wild Virginia too, and I'll send you a link to that. You can actually interact with this application, set it to specific times of the year, to a specific species, and you could find out all different types of data to it. So we're trying to expand this to the other 9 districts in VDOT to have it contribute more holistically to our Wildlife Corridor Action Plan. So what you're seeing right here is the initial, what the app looks like when you first get to it. This is all species. So we can see, it looks like a lot. If we break it down to different animals, so most of the data that we're seeing from this contractor data, unfortunately, is still large mammals. So it's still deer, it's still bear. Again, still great information because it's rounding out that police report data a little bit more. We're getting more of an idea where the hotspots are. But if we bring it down, and I think I skipped one real fast, if we look at other types of species or other types of animals, for instance, a bobcat, you can see the blue dots are much more reduced. We're not getting as much data on if a bobcat gets hit by a car. Now that might be because they're just getting hit by cars less than a black bear or a deer. But regardless, we're getting a little bit less information there. We can also go down to as far as maybe a little turtle and see how many data points we're picking up. So we can see here we're getting like maybe 1 or 2 or 3, not too many information on if turtles are crossing the road and if they're getting hit by cars. And also we're not getting any information on specific species. So, what kind of turtle is getting hit by a car here? So it's still pretty general. Again, still really great. We're going to incorporate this in the next Wildlife Corridor Action Plan. It's going to help us identify better hotspots. But we are still missing key components of what's happening to the animals when they're crossing roads. Are they getting hit? Are they not even doing it, etc. So some explanation of the biases that we're seeing from the police report data and from the contractor data of the app that I just showed you. So larger mammals tend to be larger hazards on the side of the road or in the middle of the road. And so they potentially are getting picked up by contractors faster because they are reported more quickly. And they're a little bit more of a hazard and more obvious to drivers. So again, what is the contribution of our smaller species to our wildlife vehicle conflict issue? We don't know. What species behaviorally avoid larger highways? Do individuals even attempt to cross? This is also key information. We are, again, with that species of greatest conservation need, we're working with Smithsonian Institute and using some occupancy modeling and some movement modeling. That will also be incorporated into the next version of the action plan. So that will be really helpful because then we'll get to see maybe some animals are not even crossing roads. Are smaller species using underpasses? So we do have a ton of underpasses in the state of Virginia. Whether or not a bear is able to cross them, if it's big enough for a bear to cross, but maybe it's big enough for a little turtle to cross. So are they using the smaller underpasses? And VDOT and contractor procedures. So like I said, VDOT itself, when its employees go out and get a carcass on the side of the road, do not have to identify where they found that carcass and put it on that application. So that's a large chunk of data that we're missing, and we're trying to get legislation passed that require VDOT. Any VDOT contractors or their employees, anybody who goes out and get a carcass, they're going to put it on this app. That's something that we're going to try to do in the future. Contractors, again, the way it works at VDOT is somebody will call in and say, hey, I saw a big deer carcass on the side of I-64. This was the approximate location, please go pick it up. And then VDOT has that contractor go out and get it. So there's a little bit of biases happening here because it usually is a bigger animal that the contractors go out and get. Again, things like deer and bear. So we're not seeing smaller species. We don't know what's going on there. We're missing that specific data. This is also some cool research that we also feature on our Habitat Connectivity Hub. Again, we'll give you the link to that so you can explore it. So this is a PhD candidate at Virginia Tech, and she's doing amazing research on bobcats in Virginia. She is using GPS collars to track them. And this is on the right here is I-64. And we're seeing that each color is an individual bobcat and its movement. And we're seeing that these roads are pretty large barriers to bobcat movement. They're really not going across these larger highways. So this is something big that we need to know and is a good argument for implementing a wildlife crossing. It can have large implications for wildlife if they're not able to get to other mates, to other resources, to other habitats. So some cool initial data from Virginia Tech. So again, the biggest question here is how do we explore the full impact of roads and cars on Virginia's biodiversity? And how can this lead to more impactful mitigation? So this is a picture of me in my early days. I have actually worked with Amanda at the Wildlife Center of Virginia. It was one of the key wonderful times at the start of my wildlife career. I was one of their interns, and this is me with a bald eagle they were rehabbing. So I had Wildlife Center Virginia and the way that they keep track of their data always in the back of my mind because I used to work there. And I remember working with what they call their Wild One database. It is a database that Wildlife Center Virginia did create, and other rehab centers are able to use as well. So it's this huge database of wildlife information. So how do we potentially use this data to better identify wildlife vehicle hotspots? So the Wild One database is primarily used to keep track of their patients that are coming in. It's a massive amount of data that they collect. So everything from the species, where they were found, injuries, the treatments they go under, their rehabilitation, et cetera, and then eventually what happens to them. So really just, again, a really great plethora of data. But also it is used to help conservationists, right? Researchers and general conservationists, where we can take this data and find out, especially their location data and why they're coming into wildlife rehab. And we can use that to identify, oh, is something going on? Like, is there a disease somewhere we need to deal with? In this case, is there habitat fragmentation happening? Are they getting hit by cars more so? So really valuable database for all types of conservation. So also the idea for the information and the database that I will show you in just a minute came from recent publication that Wildlife Center of Virginia did with a couple of other partners. So this is actually the name of the article. So I recommend looking it up and reading it in full. It's very, very interesting. So basically, this is all of the data from the Wild One database. So you can see how it came from Wildlife Center of Virginia and really just exploded across the board because it is such a handy database. So we have all different types of wildlife rehab centers and locations where animals are found. And basically, they really wanted to look into why are animals coming into wildlife rehab? Oh, mine's been gone. There we go. So this is a chart from this article, and it's super telling. So these are all the different reasons that certain wildlife are coming into wildlife rehab centers. So one striking revelation was that 12% overall of all of the wildlife centers we saw were admitted due to collisions with vehicles. However, we can see for certain species, it's quite a bit more. So 12% is a lot. That's not something to sneeze at. But for other species, there's quite a bit more. So you can see common box turtles. We have eastern box turtles that Amanda mentioned here. Up to 40% of admissions are coming from collisions with vehicles. So this is really identifying quite the issue. Same thing with eastern screech owls, red-tailed hawks. So they tend to go to the side of highways because litter attracts rodents, or simply their other wildlife is just attracted to the litter itself. But litter can also attract rodents, which is something yummy for instance, like an owl or a hawk. So there's a lot of information. Again, we're going to send you on the Wildlife Center of Virginia's website on please don't litter, this is why, and also these are the implications of if you litter. We're seeing a lot of owls coming in with collisions with vehicles because they're going to the sides of roads. So a lot of that can be attributed to something like that. But turtles, quite sad. So we're seeing really diverse wildlife here getting hit by cars and coming into wildlife rehab centers that we have not seen on the police report data, or we haven't seen on the carcass removal data. So this is that key information that we've been missing, and that would really help us with identifying where wildlife crossings and protected habitat corridors should go in the state of Virginia. There we go. So for the Wildlife Center of Virginia in particular, now this, the graph that we're seeing is from all of the wildlife centers in sort of like North America using Wild One. But for the Wildlife Center of Virginia in particular, from recent data, they had over 5,000 animals admitted due to vehicle conflict between 2011 and 2023. Now that could be higher because sometimes when they're admitted, we don't actually know if they got hit by, if the injuries came from a car or where it came from. So sometimes that does happen, but for confirmed wildlife vehicle conflict, this was the number. And unfortunately, what we were seeing was about 75% passed away or had to be euthanized because their injuries were so extreme. This is also something that I think I took away with me from my time interning with the Wildlife Center of Virginia. I was seeing the impacts of habitat fragmentation on our native wildlife populations and how drastic it was. You can see from this picture of Wildlife Center of Virginia here, they have an advanced hospital. It's really one of the only rehab centers I've ever seen, at least locally, that has such an advanced hospital. They even have a surgery room. So even with, an on-site staff of veterinarians and veterinary assistants, and they could do their own lab work and surgeries and all this stuff, they're still seeing quite a high mortality rate. And this is pretty telling. This is basically telling us how much ecological harm habitat fragmentation is doing on our native populations, how much roads are doing, how much vehicle conflict in particular is doing, and that the solution to this really mainly has to come from mitigation. It has to come from safe wildlife passage solutions. Okay. So now that everybody has all of the background information, quite a lot of background information, but you can see where our idea to use this data and to map it to fill in the data holes that we were missing from our Department of Transportation, our other state agencies, our contractors, and our police report data. We want to fill in that data. So we came up with the idea to take the data from the Wildlife Center of Virginia's Wild One database as a test run. So as a pilot, we're just using the Wildlife Center of Virginia's data as of right now. And we found this amazing organization called Code for Charlottesville. If you are a conservation organization really looking for, you have a tech issue, a coding project you want to do, a technical issue or project you want to do, please do reach out. We'll provide their information. They are so wonderful. They completely helped us for free. They're a volunteer organization, and they have such amazing volunteers who know so much about GIS and coding and working with large data sets that they were really fantastic in helping us build a mapping application that could help us potentially identify more hotspots of wildlife eel conflict. So this is what it looks like. This is the draft of it. I'm going to show you a video in just a second of all the things that you can do with this app and mapping application. I do have to preface, it is not available online yet because, again, this is a pilot program. We do not have enough data from all different areas of the state of Virginia and maybe some other wildlife rehab centers to fully say where maybe potentially a hotspot is just yet. As you can kind of already tell from this image, the data we have is more centered around where the Wildlife Center of Virginia is, which is the yellow star, oops, right in the center, right there. So we don't have it published yet. This is, again, just making the public and other rehab centers aware that we are doing this, so maybe we can gather more data, and so people can know that we are doing this and helping biodiversity this way. So again, this is not published because it is a pilot. We're waiting to get other data to publish the application. And then hopefully we will also be combining it with VDOT's data, their carcass removal data, and also the police report data. So then we can really just get this holistic picture of all different types of species being hit by cars, where the hotspots are, and where we need to prioritize wildlife crossings to begin with. So just wanted to preface that. It's not available just yet, so that's why I'm showing you a video of it in just a second. So please let me know if you can hear it. There we go. Okay, excited to show you a preview of our mapping application. This is not published yet because this just includes the data from the Wildlife Center of Virginia. You can see it's a little bit biased towards the Wildlife Center of Virginia. This is the Wildlife Center of Virginia right here, this yellow star. So we're waiting to get a little bit more data from other rehab centers, other locations in Virginia before we do publish it. But we can see from this that there is an immense amount of data. We did have to reduce it down from the 5,000 I previously mentioned. So this application only includes just under 2,000 individuals because this was the information that had the most accurate location data on where that individual was found, includes latitude and longitude. So we did have to reduce it down, but still pretty robust. So what we're seeing here is an organization based off of the taxonomic group, but we can also organize it by what happened to that individual. So by disposition. So as you can see, it's pretty consistent. Even with a state-of-the-art hospital for Wildlife Center of Virginia, a lot of these animals involved in wildlife eel conflict end up being euthanized or passing away, and not a lot being actually released. So the solution to this issue truly is mitigation, including wildlife crossings. We want to prevent this from happening in general. But we can also zoom in and we can see more specifically, but we're seeing a concentration along our highways We can also add different data. So we can add what I talked about before, the VDOT, Virginia Transportation Research Council, carcass removal. We can actually add that data in. We are also working on combining this data to get more of a hotspot analysis, but you can interact with it just like you do on the carcass removal application. So you can see here are deer and bear getting hit. And then you can also add in wildlife corridor action plan data. So this is our biodiversity resilience corridors. So we can see where animals are getting hit by cars more so is around these biodiversity resilience corridors sometimes. And then we can add in again the carcass removal. So we have all this different diverse data that we can add in and include, and we can sort of manipulate. We can also organize by species. So just like I said before, that carcass removal app, we're seeing a lot of deer and bear, of course, but we're missing important biodiversity aspects there, right? We're missing our smaller species. So this is the eastern box turtle. It's one of the most common species admitted to wildlife rehab centers. And we can see that this is this missing data that we weren't sort of seeing with the other data sources. So really good preview to what we can actually do with this data. It needs a bit more refinement and needs to be added to existing data, but there is a lot of potential here. All right. Okay, excited to show you a. So sorry. Okay. There we go. Maybe. There we go. Okay, so just like Amanda said, we just showed you the data points, but just want to reiterate that this is what is happening out in Virginia. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you a turtle getting run over. But this turtle lives, crosses the road. But this is what the data points are. So it is really important when we are showing, yes, we're showing a bunch of data points, but there is an animal and a really sad story behind each one of these data points. And so that's really important to remember when we're looking at these maps. This is really what we're seeing. So something really great that the Wildlife Center of Virginia mentioned that's really important to have in the back of your mind. So sorry, losing my voice. When we're dealing with wildlife vehicle conflict is what do you do? You are a person just out there driving along the roads. Because we are 9th in the nation for wildlife vehicle conflict, you have a 1 in something like 70 chance of hitting an animal every time you leave your house. So it is very likely that you are going to get in some kind of wildlife vehicle conflict. So what do you do? And both Wild Virginia and the Wildlife Center of Virginia have a lot of resources on what you do. So this is just a preview from our website of a couple of resources. So obviously for the Wildlife Center of Virginia, that is the number you can call to what you do if you get into some kind of wildlife vehicle conflict, and they will guide you. And then they also really nicely on their website provided if you live in different areas of Virginia, the wildlife center for that area. And so they provided those numbers for you. So again, we're going to provide these links so you can have these resources. And then something just really important to remember, please do not litter. Again, like I said, it attracts all types of wildlife to the side of the road, which can increase their chances of getting hit by a car and ending up at a wildlife rehab center. And especially for things like bear and deer, it's really important. I know it's really, really cool to see these animals on the side of the road, but please do not interact with them and try to remain a safe distance. They are wild animals. Let's please keep our safe distance from these bears. Please never get out of your car to take a picture of these animals. And also our Department of Wildlife Resources, they also have a number you can call if you get into a collision with a bear. And if the bear, especially if the bear is still alive, they can help you out with getting that bear to a place like the Wildlife Center of Virginia to be rehabbed. But again, the Wildlife Center of Virginia can help you with all of that as well. There we go. the last aspect of what Code for Charlottesville really helped us with was the standardization of this data between wildlife centers. So we are working with the Wild One database currently. There's a couple of other databases that wildlife centers use. It can make it a little bit difficult, however, for us to standardize the data. And that also makes it really hesitant for state agencies to use the data if it's not standardized across wildlife centers. So this means in terms of if you hit a turtle on the side of the road and you bring it to a wildlife center, what types of information are you giving the wildlife center? Are you providing exact location data, et cetera, et cetera? Sometimes, and this is very understandable, folks who hit an animal, they're a little bit discombobulated and they don't know what's happening, or they've never submitted an animal to a wildlife rehab center before, and they kind of don't know the protocol. That's totally okay. And sometimes they can forget where that animal was. So Wildlife Center Virginia has a form that you fill out, and then it gets input into the Wild One database. So a lot of the times we can actually get exact lat long. That really helps us because the Wild One database has a mapping application. So that really helps with the standardization of data. If, however, you you are a part of a wildlife rehab center in Virginia and you want to help contribute to this program, the Code for Charlottesville made this really awesome, easy to use intake form that we can help you implement at your wildlife center. You can even have it be an app or a website that people can bring up on their phone, and they can put in all the data of the animal, including they can put a pin exactly where they found that animal. So something that I really want to reiterate, no matter how or where you go when you're admitting an animal to a rehab center, please, please, please try to keep in mind exactly where you found that animal, because it helps us with conservation down the road. But again, you understand if you do, because I know it's kind of jarring. You have an animal in the back of your car, etc. But so this is something, if you are, again, work with a wildlife center or you volunteer with a wildlife center, please do get in touch. We're looking for other sources of data, and we can help you implement this intake form at your wildlife center, and to really especially get that location data, especially if it was an animal involved in wildlife field conflict. This will really help us with the current data we have, and it also helps us convince state agencies, please use this data, because we know it comes from a very standardized source. Something really awesome, I know this doesn't really look like anything, but with their intake form, the link that they have, and they have really easy to use step-by-step instructions to download this for your wildlife rehab center, or if you want it to be sort of like a website that they can bring up on their phone afterwards, we can help you with that. And Code for Charlottesville, again, is so awesome. They would love to help wildlife rehab centers with this task. And again, it is a volunteer-based organization. So, but please give them props. They are amazing. They helped us do this. It's really been fantastic working with them. So I wanted to show you some, this is the doom and gloom, right? We showed you the data and how sad it is, but I wanted to offer you of why Wild Virginia is doing this work and working with the Wildlife Center of Virginia, because we are helping our state agencies identify areas to put wildlife crossings and to protect habitat corridors. And we're already doing this. Again, our Virginia Transportation Research Council, which is a subset of VDOT, is doing a fantastic job at the research on mitigation for this issue. So I'm going to brief you on some of the research that we're already doing. This is fencing along I-64 that they put up for a test run study. There were 2 existing underpasses under I-64 that were originally used for cattle, that they attached these huge fences alongside to corral wildlife to use these underpasses. So a really good instance of, like, we already had the underpasses, we just had to put fencing up. So these are the results from this study. It's work. Okay. So after fencing, deer crashes were reduced by up to 96.5%. That's insane. And if you remember from my previous slides showing that each deer vehicle collision is $41,000 in state and personal costs, a reduction of up to 96% is huge in terms of saving lives, saving money for the individual and also for the Commonwealth in general. Deer use these crossings an insane amount, and other mammals increase quite a bit as well. And basically, the cost of the fencing was pretty much paid for in reduced wildlife fuel conflict in under 2 years. So very effective, and this is what we want to do. So this is a video camera trap of a black bear using one of these underpasses. It was directed there by fencing. So this is under I-64. Similarly, we are also trying to advance habitat connectivity for not just our terrestrial animals, but for our aquatic animals as well. So Trout Unlimited and the Department of Forestry does a really great job of creating what they call the stream simulation culvert design. We just did a webinar on this a few weeks ago, so I definitely recommend looking up that recording if you want to know more about this topic. But we're encouraging, if there's a stream involved, the underpass to really include the entire stream and including some of the floodplain in there as well. One, it helps with flood resilience, but two, it really helps with aquatic and terrestrial passage as well. So we can update our infrastructure to make it just to have all these multiple benefits: money saving, less clogging, less flooding, but more aquatic and terrestrial passage as well, and less wildlife fuel conflict. So the question might be, if we have all this really wonderful research showing cost benefits, saving human lives, saving wildlife lives, increasing habitat connectivity, why aren't wildlife crossings being built? There are no dedicated funds in the state of Virginia for this issue currently. VDOT did help create the Wildlife Crossings pilot program. They're still very much involved in that. But our state agencies do not have any dedicated funds to redo a culvert or to add fencing to existing underpasses. It doesn't exist. We've been trying to get it for the state of Virginia, having some trouble. Though we've been advocating it for the past couple of seasons, and we asked for about $500,000 this past year. It's still actually being debated about. Governor Youngkin did veto it, our funding, but there is potential for it to maybe come back in. It's probably unlikely, but we have been actively advocating for more funding for this. We are also looking for private funding and funding from other areas, grants, things like this, to build these projects. They are very expensive, but again, they pay for themselves pretty quickly a lot of the time. Not enough data, so that's what we're helping with here with the Wildlife Center of Virginia. So we're working on that issue, and it should be up to date by 2027. This is the big one. Our legislators and our state agencies do not think the public care. I think it's pretty telling that, one, it's a huge driver safety issue that the individual primarily is paying for right now. We pay taxes to VDOT to try to get roads to be safer, but as of right now, a lot of the costs, medical costs, personal property costs, comes down, and the individual is paying for this right now. So it's really fascinating. We need your help in contacting your legislators and making a huff about it that you want more crossings and protected habitat corridors to prevent this issue from happening in your area. And we can help you do that by becoming a Wild Virginia member. You can help with advocacy, you can help with lobbying. There's a ton of things we can do. And it's just not true. The public does care about this issue for a variety of different reasons. This is the only wildlife crossing in Virginia. This is in Fort Belvoir. This is an underpass that was built specifically to facilitate wildlife movement. So you can see it has a wonderful stream running through it, a wonderful stream bank. It's huge. It's like 20 by 15. It has a skylight that encourages wildlife movement. This is what we want to see everywhere. But unfortunately, most of our underpasses don't look like this. They're tiny little circles that really don't facilitate any movement or any flood resilience. So this is what we need, and we need your help in doing that. So again, to help with this, please do become a Wild Virginia member. If you work with a wildlife rehab center or you run a wildlife rehab center, please do email me if you're interested in contributing your data or uploading a form, that intake form to your website so we can get more standardized data. So please check us out. Yeah, and I think that is it for my presentation. I am going to look at questions now. And again, if you have questions directed more towards the Wildlife Center or Wildlife Center Virginia or Wild Virginia, you can do both. Okay. Let me look through our questions. Okay. So probably addressed in previous webinar, is the auto insurance industry helping to lobby for wildlife crossings to minimize the auto claims for damage? Is the auto insurance companies another source of data for capturing wildlife vehicle collisions? Yeah, absolutely. So this is something we've thought about quite a bit. So in terms of advocating for wildlife crossings, well, first of all, a lot of our data on saying that Virginia is top 10 in the nation for wildlife vehicle conflict, that comes from State Farm. So we do have access to a lot of their data, and that does help us for sure. Still, though, missing a lot of our smaller species. But also in terms of them lobbying, for a really long time, it wasn't that big of an issue, or they didn't think it was that big of an issue where they were going to get paid either way. However, it is now becoming such an extreme issue that they're starting to feel the burden as well. So it is a potential for next year for us to be contacting them again to see if they want to help. In general, though, we've asked and they haven't. Is there an effort to have mandatory requirements in the VDOT roadway clearance contracts to report back to Virginia DCR publicly? So I think this is for the carcass removal and for VDOT going out and getting carcass removal. Currently, there's no mandatory requirements. The contractor program where they go out to pick up carcasses is a pilot program. It's not mandatory, and it's only happening in 3 VDOT districts. This past General Assembly session, we were trying to go out for legislation that would require contractors in all 9 VDOT districts to record this data. It did not pass. So again, we need citizens' help in getting the point across to their legislators that we need this, and we need this better data. DCR, so that's the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and DWR, the Department of Wildlife Resources, all of them are involved in creating the Wildlife Quarter Action Plan. So they're all sort of like using each other's data, so they all know about each other. Okay, let's see here. I'm looking up other questions. Great. So let's see here. I volunteered to link the data from the Blue Ridge Wildlife Center, and I have not heard a response. We can definitely, yep, email me please at jessica@wildvirginia.org. So funding that's the other thing. If we want to implement the intake form or for a different wildlife center, we might have to do some fundraising for that individual wildlife center. Because again, Code for Charlottesville is all volunteer based. But sometimes when you're uploading an app or a new website, something like this that connects to your database and then would connect to our map is really technical, and we may need someone else who's paid, so we may have to go out for funding for it. Let's see here. Um, is there a data layer for the application that shows the costs and vehicle damages and lost lives? So we get some of our, well, all of our pretty much police report data from the Department of Motor Vehicles, and they include mortalities. Luckily, there are not a lot of mortalities from wildlife vehicle conflict. There's a ton of costs and a ton of injuries, but luckily, so far there's around like 4 deaths per year. Too much. But in terms of getting a legislator to recognize you, it's unfortunately not enough. The cost, though, is definitely the thing that we emphasize. Um, we could potentially upload a data layer to the application that shows the cost. We'd have to think a little bit more about that. But that's an interesting concept. I like that a lot. The Fort Belvoir Wildlife Crossing was built in the 90s when that road was built, and the military paid for it. So the military, because of Fort Belvoir, wanted to mitigate some of the like environmental degradation that would happen with building a fort there. And so when that road was built right outside of Fort Belvoir, they built multiple wildlife crossings. The one that we showed in that picture, though, is the best one, the one that we model and we want around Virginia. So it was a military, and it was very forward thinking. They did an amazing job on that wildlife crossing. It's huge. It includes all the elements we want in a wildlife crossing. It's fantastic. What is the status of the road crossing for red wolves? I think that's for the state of North Carolina primarily. They won recently a federal grant for 25 million for a wildlife crossing project for specifically for red wolves. However, that federal funding is now frozen. And so they have no idea if they're going to get that money. And so the project as of right now is frozen. Let's see. Can we approach insurance companies for an opt-in or opt-out for the premiums to go towards a fund? That's a great idea. Or like license plates or a stamp. We have thoughts. Yeah, that's so great. We have thought about all these options. We've definitely been giving them to our legislators. I like the opt-in, opt-out option. I think that's great. That's definitely a potential that we've been thinking of. Just generally across the board, though, it's the issue of legislators really don't think the public cares that much. And so a lot of our legislation and our funding requests get pushed to the side. So it's interesting. So hence us formulating it in a way where we're trying to incorporate more flood resilience and aquatic passage into our work as well, which we can just get all these really lovely benefits. So that's a great idea. We definitely are working on some similar ideas for Virginia. Is there any push to enclose trash dumpsters in rural areas? I live in Floyd County and last year witnessed 5 bear road kills along. Yeah. Ugh, 3 mile stretch on Route 8. The carcasses were within yards from the dumpsters. I've never seen that many kills along the highway. Yeah, see, this is the issue of trash and attracting wildlife to roadsides is a huge issue. That to have bear safe trash containers, we definitely recommend please do use those if you can have access to them. That is definitely another form of legislation that we could try to advocate for in the state of Virginia is requiring more bear safe or wildlife safe dumpsters and trash receptacles. Yeah, definitely an issue that we're thinking about. But if in your specific area, a lot of the times it's really the localities who are going to be able to get you those trash cans much quicker. So you can definitely link up with us and we can help you get in contact with your localities and think of different ways to put pressure on certain officials to get bear safe or wildlife safe trash cans for your area. That's definitely one of those stories that are effective in pushing for getting some kind of help from what have you. But great idea. Yeah. Sad story. Unfortunately, that's the thing that happens most to us. I feel like I'm missing a question. Maybe I skipped one. I think when the person asked when proposals are drafted, where would funds come from? That was asking more, I think maybe for the wildlife quarter action plan or for just in general for like a proposal for a wildlife crossing. It's a great question. The wildlife corridor action plan was not funded at all. So our legislators required our Department of Transportation, Wildlife Resources, Conservation and Recreation, and Forestry to create this wildlife court action plan, and they got no additional funds to help them. They had to simply just use their staff time to create this plan. Unfortunate. We tried to get them funding, but legislators are not giving them funds for this right now. For something like a proposal for a wildlife crossing, where that funding would come from, it would primarily come from something like a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant, which comes partially from the federal government and partially from other sources. So something like that, or from a private donor. We're thinking about doing a program in Virginia of like, would you like a wildlife crossing to be in your name? Please donate to this wildlife crossing. Something like that. And then we are going to continue to advocate for getting more federal funding sources, more state funding sources, but we are looking for private sources and private grantors for this funding for sure. Does anybody have any other questions? Any questions for Amanda for Wildlife Center of Virginia? All right. Well, my email again is right there. If you have any additional questions or again, if you're with a wildlife center or anything like that, please do reach out. Love to hear from you. And you're going to receive all the links that we had in this presentation. I will also link to the Wildlife Center of Virginia for you and to Wild Virginia. Yeah, and so we'll provide everything to you in a follow-up email. Thank you so much to Amanda and Wildlife Center of Virginia for being here and donating their data for this project, and Code for Charlottesville for creating our map and our intake form. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone.